Now, you must have been living under a rock if you hadn't heard all of the warnings about Chinese involvement in critical infrastructure. They wanted to build our 5G network, but an intelligence briefing document from Five Eyes, which is the joint intelligence operation between all of the sort of Western Anglosphere, warned very much that you cannot have China involved in critical infrastructure because they might do things that enable them to listen in, take control, sabotage. This warning has come out again and again and again and again for well over a decade, and not just in the UK, but from our counterparts in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America. We had to bin that 5G contract that Boris Johnson had signed with Huawei and then had to quickly rescind on when he actually bothered to read the security briefing that landed on his desk at the same day. Also, we've had to sort of reduce the amount that they're involved with helping create critical infrastructure such as nuclear power stations. But oh no, old Ed Zero with his ukulele down the wind farm field has been going over to Beijing every 5 seconds with giant charity checks to buy bits and bobs for his climate change zealousy. And it turns out that apparently Chinese kill switches have been found hidden in America solar farms, which is prompting calls for Ed Miliband to now halt the rollout of renewables. I mean, what are kill switches? That sounds pretty scary stuff. Well, it doesn't actually mean you press a button and you actually blow people up, aka, you know, walkie-talkies and Hezbollah. But it does mean that you can essentially turn off parts of the grid. You can actually go, right, we're going to prevent that from feeding into the network. And if you suddenly end up, if on a really sunny day, you have a whole load of power coming from solar panels because they're munching up that sunshine, and then all of a sudden, after a big power surge, it just gets cut off, do you know what happens? Spain. Blackouts. That's what happens. So this, to me, seems pretty darn alarming. Well, let's speak to Andrew Montford, who's Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch. I mean, Andrew, I'm opposed to paper in our green and pleasant land, which we should be using for arable purposes, with a load of Chinese-manufactured silicon plates that probably will barely contribute anything to our grid because we only have sunny days about 1/3 of the year. But what they found in America suggests that actually all of the worst fears about Chinese involvement in critical infrastructure have essentially been proven to be true.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, I think we've had the impression for a long time that critical infrastructure like wind and solar farms are a risk. It's not an issue, I think, that has really been in the public consciousness. But, you know, we've always imagined that, you know, people might go and cut the cable to an offshore wind farm. You know, the Russians have these submarines that can have cable cutting capabilities. But the Chinese, I guess, are a little bit cleverer, aren't they? You know, they just do it remotely and electronically, and they can just switch off. I think the point you made that essentially they could cause a Spanish-style blackout is the important one. It's not as if they need to switch off every wind farm or every solar panel in the country. They just need to switch off enough to destabilize the grid, and our grid is increasingly unstable. And yes, that could then lead to the whole thing being wiped out. So
who's to say, actually? We still don't fully understand what happened in Spain. You know, they sort of said, oh, this might be a cyber attack, and then couldn't seem to evidence it. What we do understand is because of the differing levels of power surges going through the system, it then blew the whole lot up. Thankfully, they managed to restore it, and thankfully, the Spanish didn't go tonto and started kicking in shop windows, which, you know, after 24 hours of blackout in London, it's going to be lootsville.com. Every single Foot Locker in the country would find itself needing a glazier the next day. But I'm worried, actually, that we haven't had the revelations of what actually went on in Spain. Perhaps they should be looking at where they got their solar panels from.
It's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that one. Yeah, I mean, it could be. I think there does seem to be a story that, you know, I think they do have a good idea of what the initial fault was. You know, people seem to be pointing at you know, some unusual weather conditions that essentially made the cables flap about, if you like, in the air, and then they got a short circuit that caused the fault. Faults happen on grids all the time. The problem that the Spanish had is that their grid, like ours, is very unstable because it's full of renewables. And so that small fault then led to a nationwide blackout. So that is the problem that I think we should really be worried about. We're never going to stop every single fault on a grid. But when you have a foreign power that can essentially cause faults on your grid, you're in a very, very exposed position. And I think that is something that, questions need to be asked in Parliament about this, as to, have we just ignored the national security implications of the renewables revolution, if you like, and all the other sort of downsides of the renewables revolution have been ignored completely. So it wouldn't be surprising if the national security angle has not been ignored as well.
The fact they're buying all this stuff from Beijing, probably from factories with forced labour, I think suggests that they probably have been failing to do due diligence on their on the provenance of some of the windworms and the solar panels that Miliband seems to be buying up. How suitable is solar for this country anyway? Because you look out the window today, beautiful clear sky over London. What a gorgeous vista I have from my peephole in Talk Towers. But more often than not, when you're flying into the UK from abroad, you're about to enter our islands because it's just carpeted in thick cloud normally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think to myself, swathes of farmers' fields, land that should be used, frankly, for either raising cattle, growing crops, or rewilding, if you really wanted to help the environment, is instead covered in nasty silicon, which is made in a country that pumps out as much carbon as they want. So regardless of what you think about climate change, it doesn't seem to me to come to any sort of net zero anyway. And I just think, I can't see. I can understand making fields and fields of solar panels in Morocco, right? I've been to Morocco plenty of time. There's a lot of land there that just can't be farmed because it is dry. It's next to the desert and there's not enough irrigation. So fine, whacking a load of solar panels there where it's guaranteed sunshine seems like a good idea. On our funny little island, which is obsessed with weather because it changes every 5 seconds, I just can't see that this machinery is in any way suitable to us.
Yeah, there's been some studies actually to assess each country's suitability for solar power, and we are if not the very bottom, we are actually the second bottom. There is only one country in the world that's worse than the UK for solar power, and that's Ireland. It's pretty poor in the UK. The issue is that, of course, you can get these solar panels really quite cheaply now because they're made by slave labor in China. And also the Chinese do have this sort of general tactic of underpricing things to try and get market share. So we're living in a false economy, if you like, because what people are paying for solar panels is not the true cost, and let alone taking into account the moral, ethical, and national security downsides. They are going to keep going in, and this is the problem that we face at the moment. Until we get somebody sensible in corridors of power who is just going to say, look, we really shouldn't be doing this. The farmland thing is another national security angle in a way, isn't it?
It is. I say this all the time. We only produce 60% of the food we eat, which is a similar ratio to the outbreak of World War II. And guess what happened? We had to dig for victory. All of a sudden, we didn't have food to eat. Everyone had to have ration books. Although we're a pretty obese country, it might do us some good. But actually, if you want to look at what the direction of travel is for a lot of countries when it comes to farming, China is having a massive push to make sure that they create 100% of all of their food. They're going hard and fast down the line of self-sufficiency, which says to me a lot when it comes to geopolitical intentions, messing about with maritime supply routes. We're an island. If we don't grow our own food and anything happens to the Channel or the Black Sea or the Red Sea or the North Sea or the Irish Sea, that's it. We're done. It won't take long before our supermarket shelves are empty. It astonishes me. It astonishes me that, this idiot little man with his nasally congested voice goes around saying he wants to save the planet, and his response to doing that is papering over our green and pleasant land with silicon plastic plates, which don't even work. Oh, Andrew, I
the
despair.
thing with Ed Miliband is that, you know, he's a fanatic. If you try to understand the logic of what he's doing, you'll get lost. There is no logic. He's a fanatic. He just wants to do net zero, whatever.
I wish he would do one. That would be my dream. Andrew, thank you ever so much. Thank you for your thoughts. And it's interesting, Andrew said that, you know, if, what we need is leadership. If somebody says we've got to get rid of all these net zero targets, they are strangulating industry. They're weakening our economy. And I can think of one particular party who actually dines out on that sort of manifesto.